You walk into important meetings feeling like an imposter, your heart racing as you wonder if everyone can see through your carefully constructed facade. Every presentation, every networking event, every crucial conversation leaves you second-guessing yourself, while others seem to possess an unshakable confidence that you desperately wish you could capture. I am Dale Carnegie, and I transformed myself from a terrified farm boy who couldn't speak in public to the man who taught millions how to win friends and influence people. What I discovered about building genuine self-confidence will give you the exact blueprint to develop the inner strength that radiates outward and commands respect in any situation. The same principles that helped me overcome paralyzing shyness and build a confidence empire can transform your relationship with yourself and revolutionize how others perceive you. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing insights, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to discover true confidence. I want you to picture a scrawny farm boy from Missouri, so painfully shy that he would cross the street to avoid having to speak to neighbors. That was me in 1888, growing up on a pig farm near Maryville, where my biggest fear wasn't the livestock or the brutal farm work. It was the thought of having to speak in front of other people. My father, James William Carnegie, was a hard-working man who struggled to keep our family fed. We were poor, desperately poor, and I wore hand-me-down clothes that never quite fit. But the poverty of our circumstances was nothing compared to the poverty of my confidence. I was convinced that I was inferior to everyone around me, that I had nothing valuable to contribute to any conversation. When I enrolled at the State Teachers College in Warrensburg, I was determined to change my life, but I had no idea how terrifying that change would be. The college required students to participate in debate and public speaking, my worst nightmare made mandatory. I can still remember my first attempt at a speech. My hand shook so violently I couldn't hold my notes steady. My voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy's. Sweat poured down my face despite the cool autumn air. I failed miserably. Not just once, but repeatedly. Week after week, I would stand before my classmates and humiliate myself. Some students snickered, others looked away in embarrassment, not for themselves, but for me. I wanted to quit school, to run back to the farm where I could hide among the pigs and never have to face an audience again. But something interesting happened during those dark months of repeated failure. I began to notice that I wasn't the only one struggling. Even the students who seemed confident on the surface would betray signs of nervousness, a trembling hand, a quaver in their voice, a flush creeping up their neck. I realized that everyone, absolutely everyone, was fighting their own battle with fear and self-doubt. The turning point came during my second year. I had been assigned to give a speech about my childhood experiences. Instead of trying to impress my classmates with flowery language or borrowed ideas, I decided to simply tell the truth about life on our pig farm. I talked about the early morning chores, the financial struggles, the simple dignity of hard work. Something magical happened that day. My classmates didn't laugh at me, they listened, really listened. After my speech, several students approached me to share their own stories of humble beginnings. I had discovered something profound. Authenticity creates connection, and connection builds confidence. From that moment forward, I began to see public speaking not as a performance designed to showcase my superiority, but as an opportunity to share genuine human experiences. The more honest I became about my struggles, the more people responded. The more I focused on serving my audience rather than impressing them, the more my confidence grew. I started volunteering for extra speaking opportunities. I joined the debate team. I sought out every chance to practice this skill that had once terrified me. Each small success built upon the last, creating a momentum that began to transform not just my speaking ability, but my entire sense of self. By the time I graduated, I had won several speaking contests and earned a reputation as one of the college's most effective speakers. But more importantly, I had learned that confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build brick by brick through consistent action in the face of fear. I had discovered the principles that would later help millions of people overcome their own limitations and achieve success beyond their wildest dreams. After my transformation at college, I spent years studying what separated confident people from those who remained trapped by fear and self-doubt. I observed hundreds of students, business leaders, and public figures, searching for the common threads that created lasting confidence versus the brittle facade that crumbled under pressure. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about confidence. Most people are chasing the wrong thing entirely. They're pursuing what I call performance confidence, the ability to look good in the moment, to impress others, to project an image of success. But this type of confidence is like a house built on sand. The moment something unexpected happens, the moment they face real criticism or genuine challenge, it all comes crashing down. I watched brilliant people sabotage themselves because their confidence was built on external validation. When the applause stopped, when the promotion didn't come, when someone criticized their work, they fell apart completely. They had built their self-worth on outcomes they couldn't fully control, and when those outcomes disappointed them, their confidence evaporated. True confidence, I learned, comes from an entirely different source. It's not about believing you'll always succeed or that everyone will like you. It's not about having all the answers or never making mistakes. Real confidence is the deep, unshakable knowledge that you can handle whatever comes your way. It's the certainty that even if you fail, even if you're criticized, even if things don't go according to plan, you'll figure out how to move forward. This kind of confidence has three foundational pillars that I've seen consistently in every genuinely confident person I've studied. First is self-knowledge, the brutal honesty to see yourself clearly, including both your strengths and your limitations. Second is preparation, the willingness to do the work necessary to perform at your best. Third is resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks and use them as fuel for growth. Let me explain why each of these pillars is essential. Self-knowledge prevents you from building confidence on false foundations. When you know exactly what you can and cannot do, you don't waste energy pretending to be something you're not. You don't set yourself up for devastating surprises. You operate from a place of authentic strength. Preparation gives you legitimate reasons to feel confident. When you've done everything possible to ready yourself for a challenge, you can face it with genuine calm. You're not hoping everything will work out. You've stacked the odds in your favor through systematic effort. Resilience ensures that your confidence survives contact with reality. Everyone faces failure, rejection, and criticism. The difference between confident and unconfident people isn't that confident people avoid these experiences. It's that they've learned to process them differently. They see setbacks as temporary and specific rather than permanent and universal. I've noticed something fascinating about how confidence compounds over time. Each time you handle a difficult situation successfully, each time you bounce back from a setback, each time you act despite your fears, you're making a deposit in your confidence bank account. These deposits accumulate, creating a reserve of self-trust that you can draw upon during future challenges. The people with unshakable confidence aren't those who've never failed. They're those who've failed repeatedly and learned that they can survive and even thrive in the aftermath. They've discovered that their worth isn't dependent on perfect performance or universal approval. They've built their confidence on the bedrock of their own resilience and competence. This is why surface-level confidence techniques fail. Positive affirmations without substance, power poses without preparation, fake it till you make it strategies. These approaches might provide temporary relief, but they don't create lasting change. True confidence must be earned through genuine achievement and authentic growth. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it creates a positive spiral. As your real confidence grows, you become more willing to take appropriate risks. As you take more risks, you gain more experience. As you gain more experience, you develop greater competence. As your competence increases, your confidence grows even stronger. This is how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things, not through arrogance or self-deception, but through the steady accumulation of evidence that they can handle whatever life presents. The first principle of unshakable confidence is perhaps the most difficult for most people to embrace. You must know yourself completely, including the parts you'd rather ignore. I learned this lesson the hard way when I started my first business venture after college, a correspondence course company that I was certain would make me rich. I had convinced myself that I was a natural entrepreneur, that my success in public speaking automatically translated to business acumen. I ignored my complete lack of experience in finance, marketing, and operations. I refused to acknowledge that I was impulsive, overly optimistic, and terrible at attention to detail. Within 18 months, the business had failed spectacularly, taking my savings and my ego with it. That failure forced me to conduct what I now call a personal inventory, a systematic, honest assessment of who I really was, not who I wished I could be. I had to face the uncomfortable truth that I had strengths in some areas and significant weaknesses in others. More importantly, I had to accept that acknowledging these weaknesses wasn't an act of self-destruction. It was the beginning of real strength. Here's how I conduct a personal inventory, and how I've taught thousands of others to do the same. First, make 3 lists. On the first list, write down everything you're genuinely good at. Don't be modest here. If you're an excellent listener, write it down. If you have a knack for making people laugh, include it. If you're organized, detail-oriented, or great with numbers, acknowledge these strengths fully. On the second list, write down everything you struggle with or do poorly. This is where most people want to quit the exercise, but it's absolutely essential. If you're chronically late, write it down. If you avoid conflict, acknowledge it. If you procrastinate, interrupt people, or have trouble with technology, include these limitations. The goal isn't to beat yourself up, it's to see clearly. On the third list, write down your genuine accomplishments, not the ones that sound impressive to others, but the ones that required you to overcome real obstacles or develop actual skills. Include everything from learning to drive, to surviving a difficult period in your life, to mastering a hobby that challenged you. When I did this exercise after my business failure, I discovered some illuminating patterns. My strengths clustered around communication, inspiration, and connecting with people. My weaknesses centered on administrative tasks, financial planning, and systematic follow-through. My accomplishments showed a clear pattern of succeeding when I could leverage my natural abilities and struggling when I tried to operate outside them. This knowledge became the foundation of everything I built afterward. Instead of trying to become someone I wasn't, I learned to structure my life and career around my actual strengths while finding ways to compensate for my weaknesses. When I eventually started teaching public speaking, I partnered with people who were strong in areas where I was weak. I hired administrators to handle details while I focused on curriculum and instruction. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. Accepting your weaknesses doesn't mean resigning yourself to them. It means being strategic about which ones to improve and which ones to work around. Some weaknesses are worth the effort to overcome because they're holding you back in areas that matter to you. Others are simply part of who you are, and your energy is better spent maximizing your strengths. I realized that my tendency toward impulsiveness, which had hurt me in business, could actually be an asset in teaching and speaking when channeled properly. My difficulty with administrative details wasn't a character flaw. It was simply not where my talents lay. By accepting this reality rather than fighting it, I could make better decisions about how to spend my time and energy. The confidence that comes from genuine self-knowledge is unshakable because it's based on truth rather than wishful thinking. When you know exactly what you can and cannot do, You stop setting yourself up for failure. You stop taking on challenges that don't match your abilities, and you start gravitating toward opportunities that allow you to shine. This doesn't mean limiting yourself or avoiding growth. It means being smart about where and how you grow. When you understand your natural patterns and tendencies, you can work with them rather than against them. You can build a life and career that feels authentic and sustainable rather than like a constant struggle to be someone you're not. Most importantly, when you fully accept yourself, strengths, weaknesses, and all, you stop needing others to validate your worth. You're no longer devastated by criticism because you already know your limitations. You're no longer dependent on praise because you know your strengths. You operate from a place of genuine confidence because you're grounded in reality rather than fantasy. After I began teaching public speaking classes in New York City, I noticed something that separated my most confident students from those who remained paralyzed by fear. The confident ones prepared with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They didn't just review their material, they lived with it, breathed it, and made it part of themselves until delivering it felt as natural as having a conversation with a close friend. I learned this principle myself through a humiliating experience that I'll never forget. I had been invited to speak at a prestigious business club in Manhattan, my first real opportunity to establish myself as a serious instructor. I was so confident in my natural speaking ability that I barely prepared. I glanced over my notes. On the subway ride there, figuring I could charm my way through whatever gaps existed in my knowledge. The moment I stood up to speak, I realized my terrible mistake. Without thorough preparation, my mind went blank. I fumbled for words, repeated myself, and delivered what was undoubtedly one of the worst speeches of my career. The audience was polite but clearly unimpressed. I had squandered a golden opportunity because I had confused natural talent with readiness. That night, I developed what I now call the over-preparation principle. From that point forward, I would prepare for every speaking engagement as if my entire career depended on that single presentation. I would research my topic until I knew it better than anyone in the room. I would anticipate every possible question and prepare thoughtful responses. I would rehearse my delivery until every gesture and pause felt perfectly natural. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. When you prepare thoroughly, something magical happens to your confidence. You stop worrying about whether you'll know what to say because you've already said it dozens of times in practice. You stop fearing questions because you've already considered every angle. You stop feeling like an imposter because you genuinely have become an expert on your subject. But preparation isn't just about memorizing content. It's about creating multiple layers of readiness. I prepare mentally by visualizing every aspect of the experience. I imagine walking into the room, connecting with individuals in the audience, handling technical problems, and responding to difficult questions. By the time I actually give the presentation, I've already delivered it successfully in my mind dozens of times. I prepare physically by practicing my gestures, movements, and vocal patterns. I rehearse standing confidently, making eye contact, and using my voice to emphasize key points. I even practice what I'll do with my hands, how I'll enter and exit the stage, and how I'll handle my materials. Every physical aspect of the performance becomes automatic through repetition. I prepare emotionally by connecting deeply with my material and my purpose. I remind myself why this message matters, how it can help people, and what difference it might make in someone's life. When you're driven by a sense of mission rather than mere ego, your confidence becomes unshakable because it's not really about you anymore. It's about the value you're providing. Most people dramatically underestimate how much preparation is required to appear effortless. They see a confident speaker or performer and assume it comes naturally, not realizing that what looks spontaneous is actually the result of meticulous planning and practice. The old saying is absolutely true. The harder you work, the luckier you get. I've developed what I call The 80-20 rule of preparation. 80% of your confidence in any situation comes from your level of preparation. Only 20% comes from natural talent, charm, or circumstances. This means that almost anyone can become genuinely confident in almost any situation if they're willing to do the work required. The beautiful thing about thorough preparation is that it creates what I call confidence overflow. When you've prepared beyond what's actually necessary, you have reserves to draw upon when unexpected challenges arise. If someone asks a question you hadn't anticipated, you have enough depth of knowledge to improvise a thoughtful response. If technical problems disrupt your presentation, you're relaxed enough to handle them gracefully because your core message is so solid. Preparation also eliminates the fear of the unknown that paralyzes so many people. When you've thought through every possible scenario and prepared for each one, there are no surprises left to terrify you. You can focus entirely on connecting with your audience and delivering value rather than worrying about what might go wrong. If a fear. Noticed that people often resist this level of preparation because they think it will make them seem robotic or inauthentic. The opposite is actually true. When your preparation is thorough enough, it becomes invisible. You're so comfortable with your material that you can be completely present and responsive to what's happening in the moment. The preparation creates space for genuine spontaneity rather than limiting it. This principle applies far beyond public speaking. Whether you're going into a job interview, a difficult conversation, or an important meeting, the same rule applies. Your confidence will be directly proportional to your level of preparation. When you've done everything possible to ready yourself for the challenge ahead, you can face it with genuine calm and assurance. One of the most destructive myths about confidence is that you need to feel confident before you can act confidently. I've watched countless talented people remain stuck for years because they were waiting for confidence to arrive before they would take their first step. They had it completely backward. Confidence doesn't create action. Action creates confidence. I discovered this truth during my early days teaching in New York. I had a student named Margaret, a brilliant accountant who desperately wanted to advance into management, but was terrified of speaking up in meetings. She kept telling me she would start participating once she felt more confident. Week after week, she attended my classes, but refused to practice speaking in front of the group because she didn't feel ready. Finally, I had to be brutally honest with her. "Margaret," I said, "you're never going to feel confident until you start acting confident. Confidence isn't a feeling that arrives before action. It's a feeling that develops through action." I challenged her to speak up just once in our next class, even if her voice shook and her hands trembled. She did it. Her voice did shake. Her hands did tremble. But something remarkable happened afterward. She felt a small spark of pride, a tiny sense of accomplishment. She had done something she thought was impossible. That one small action created a foundation for the next, slightly larger action, and the next, and the next. Within 6 months, Margaret was leading presentations for her entire department. Within a year, she had been promoted to senior management. But it all started with that one terrifying moment when she chose to act despite her fear rather than waiting for her fear to disappear. This is what I call the confidence ladder approach. You don't start by attempting to climb Mount Everest of confidence. You start by stepping onto the first rung of the ladder. Each small action, each tiny victory, each moment of courage builds upon the last to create genuine momentum. The key is to start exactly where you are, with exactly what you have, facing exactly the challenges in front of you right now. Don't wait until you have more experience, better circumstances, or fewer fears. Those conditions may never arrive, and even if they do, you'll just find new reasons to postpone action. I learned to apply this principle in my own career when I wanted to transition from teaching to writing and lecturing on a larger scale. I could have waited until I felt qualified to write a book or speak to massive audiences. Instead, I started with what was available to me, small speaking engagements at local organizations, and articles for modest publications. Each small success built my confidence for slightly larger opportunities. Each article I published made me feel more like a real writer. Each speech I gave to a small group prepared me for larger audiences. I wasn't pretending to be more successful than I was. I was systematically building the skills and confidence that would eventually support greater success. The beautiful thing about starting small is that it removes the pressure that paralyzes so many people. When the stakes are low, you can afford to make mistakes and learn from them. You can experiment with different approaches without risking everything. You can build your skills gradually rather than expecting perfection from yourself immediately. I've noticed that people often resist starting small because they think it means accepting mediocrity or limiting their ambitions. The opposite is true. Starting small is the fastest path to achieving big things because it creates the momentum and skills necessary for larger successes. Every expert was once a beginner. Every confident person was once terrified. The momentum principle is absolutely crucial to understand. Newton's law of motion applies to confidence just as it does to physics. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest, while objects in motion tend to stay in motion. When you're stuck in inaction, it requires enormous energy to get moving. But once you start moving, even slowly, it becomes much easier to keep moving and even to accelerate. I teach my students to celebrate every small win, no matter how insignificant it might seem to others. Did you speak up once in a meeting? Celebrate it. Did you make one phone call you'd been avoiding? Acknowledge that victory. Did you introduce yourself to one new person at a networking event? That's progress worth recognizing. These micro-victories accumulate in your subconscious mind as evidence that you're the kind of person who takes action despite fear. Each one makes the next action slightly easier. Over time, this creates a fundamental shift in your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who avoids challenges and start seeing yourself as someone who faces them head-on. The most important thing to remember is that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of fear. Every confident person I've ever known still feels afraid sometimes. The difference is that they've learned to act despite their fear rather than waiting for it to disappear. They've discovered that confidence comes not from the elimination of fear, but from the repeated experience of surviving fear and moving forward anyway. The greatest breakthrough in my understanding of confidence came through an unexpected source. My most difficult student. His name was Robert, a successful lawyer who had joined my speaking class because his career had stalled. Despite his intelligence and expertise, he was paralyzed whenever he had to present to clients or colleagues. Robert's problem wasn't lack of knowledge or preparation. He knew his material better than anyone. His problem was that he was completely focused on himself. Every time he stood up to speak, his mind was consumed with questions. What do they think of me? Am I making a good impression? Do I look foolish? Are they judging my appearance, my voice, my credentials? This self-focused thinking created a vicious cycle. The more he worried about himself, the more nervous he became. The more nervous he became, the worse his performance got. The worse his performance got, the more reason he had to worry about what people thought of him. He was trapped in a prison of self-consciousness. I had been struggling to help Robert for weeks when I had a revelation that changed both his life and my teaching forever. During one particularly painful practice session, I stopped him mid-speech and asked a simple question. Robert, what do you think your audience wants from you right now? He looked confused. I suppose they want me to give a good speech? No, I said. They want you to help them solve a problem. They want information they can use. They want insights that will make their lives better. They don't care about impressing you. They want you to serve them. I could see the light bulb turning on in his mind. I continued, what if, instead of worrying about what they think of you, you focused entirely on what you can give to them? What if every moment of your presentation was about their needs rather than your fears? The transformation was immediate and remarkable. In Robert's next practice session, he spoke with a clarity and confidence that amazed everyone in the room. When I asked him what had changed, he said, "I forgot about myself completely. I was so focused on helping them understand the legal concepts that would protect their businesses that I didn't have time to worry about my own performance." This is what I call the service mindset shift, and it's perhaps the most powerful confidence technique I've ever discovered. When you shift your focus from self-consciousness to service consciousness, something magical happens. Your nervousness doesn't disappear completely, but it transforms from paralyzing fear into productive energy that you can channel toward helping others. The reason this works so powerfully is that it aligns with a fundamental truth about human psychology. We're most confident when we're not thinking about ourselves. Watch a master craftsman at work, a talented teacher in the classroom, or a skilled doctor with a patient. They're not worried about how they look or what others think of them. They're completely absorbed in the task of serving others through their expertise. I began applying this principle to my own speaking and teaching. Instead of walking into a classroom wondering whether my students would like me or be impressed by my credentials, I focused entirely on what I could give them. What insights could I share that would genuinely help them overcome their fears? What techniques could I teach that would actually improve their lives? This shift in focus eliminated most of my performance anxiety because it gave me something much more important to think about than my own fears. When you're genuinely concerned with serving others, you don't have mental bandwidth left over for self-consciousness. Your attention is directed outward toward your audience's needs rather than inward toward your own insecurities. The service mindset also makes you infinitely more attractive and compelling to others. People can sense immediately whether you're focused on them or on yourself. When you're genuinely trying to help them, they feel it and they respond with attention, appreciation, and trust. When you're focused on impressing them or protecting your own ego, they sense that too, and they instinctively pull back. I learned to start every speaking engagement by asking myself 3 questions. What does this audience need to know? How? Can I present this information in a way that's most useful to them? What's the best thing that could happen for them as a result of this presentation? These questions immediately shifted my focus from my own performance to their experience. The beautiful thing about the service mindset is that it makes you more generous with your knowledge, more patient with questions, and more willing to admit when you don't know something. When your goal is to serve rather than to impress, you're not afraid to say, "I don't know, but I'll find out," or "That's a great question that I hadn't considered." This authenticity actually increases rather than decreases your credibility. This principle extends far beyond public speaking. In job interviews, instead of focusing on whether they'll hire you, focus on how you can solve their problems. In meetings, instead of worrying about whether your ideas will be accepted, focus on what insights you can contribute that will help the team succeed. In social situations, instead of wondering whether people will like you, focus on what you can do to make their experience more enjoyable. The paradox is perfect. The less you focus on making a good impression, the better impression you make. The less you worry about being liked, the more likable you become. The less you try to prove your worth, the more valuable you appear to others. When you shift from trying to get something from people to trying to give something to people, everything changes. I once had a student who was brilliant, well-prepared, and genuinely wanted to help others. Yet she remained paralyzed by fear. Her name was Helen, and she possessed all the external elements of confidence, but was being destroyed by an invisible enemy, the voice inside her head. She would later teach me one of the most important lessons about the relationship between our internal dialogue and our external confidence. Helen's inner voice was relentlessly cruel. As she prepared for presentations, I could see her having conversations with herself, and they weren't encouraging pep talks. Later, she shared with me the constant stream of criticism that ran through her mind. You're not smart enough for this. Everyone will see that you don't belong here. You're going to embarrass yourself. Why did you think you could do this? I realized that Helen was not just fighting her external circumstances. She was fighting a war inside her own mind, and she was losing badly. No amount of external preparation or technique could overcome the constant barrage of self-defeating thoughts that undermined her confidence before she even began to speak. That's when I understood something crucial. Confidence is not just about what you do. It's about what you say to yourself while you're doing it. The conversation you have with yourself in your own mind has more impact on your performance than any external factor. If that internal voice is your enemy, you'll struggle no matter how talented or prepared you are. I began studying the internal dialogue patterns of my most confident students versus those who remained stuck in fear. The difference was striking. Confident people didn't have perfect inner voices. They had disciplined inner voices. They had learned to catch negative thoughts and replace them with more useful ones. I developed what I call the thought replacement method. First, you must become aware of your internal dialogue. Most people go through their days completely unconscious of the constant chatter in their minds. You need to start paying attention to what you're telling yourself, especially in challenging situations. I taught Helen to carry a small notebook and write down the negative thoughts that occurred to her throughout the day. At first, she was shocked by how harsh and frequent they were. She was saying things to herself that she would never say to another human being. She was her own worst critic, her harshest judge, and her most discouraging voice. Once you become aware of your negative self-talk, the next step is to challenge its accuracy. Most of our self-defeating thoughts are not facts. They're opinions, fears, or assumptions. I taught Helen to ask herself, is this thought actually true? Is it helpful? Would I say this to a friend facing the same situation? Often, the answer to all three questions was no. She was telling herself things like, I always mess up presentations, when the truth was that she had given several successful presentations. She was predicting catastrophic outcomes that had never actually happened. She was treating her fears as facts and her assumptions as evidence. The final step is replacement. Instead of trying to eliminate negative thoughts entirely, which is nearly impossible, you consciously choose more accurate and helpful thoughts. When Helen caught herself thinking, I'm going to embarrass myself, she learned to replace it with, I'm well prepared and have something valuable to share. This isn't about delusional positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. It's about replacing inaccurate, destructive thoughts with accurate, constructive ones. The goal isn't to convince yourself that you're perfect. It's to have a more realistic and supportive internal dialogue. I've noticed that confident people have developed what I call internal coaching voices. Instead of beating themselves up for mistakes, they offer themselves the same kind of encouragement and guidance they would give to someone they cared about. They've learned to be their own best coach rather than their worst enemy. The transformation in Helen was remarkable. As she gained control over her internal dialogue, her external confidence grew dramatically. She started volunteering for speaking opportunities, taking on leadership roles, and pursuing promotions she had previously thought were beyond her reach. The change wasn't just in her performance. It was in her entire sense of what was possible. For her life, I learned to apply this principle to my own challenges as well. When I faced rejection from publishers, criticism from colleagues, or failures in my business ventures, I had to consciously choose how I would interpret these experiences in my internal dialogue. I could tell myself they proved I wasn't good enough, or I could tell myself they were valuable learning experiences that were preparing me for future success. The voice you choose to listen to in your mind becomes the voice that shapes your reality. If you consistently tell yourself you're capable, prepared, and valuable, you'll act in ways that make those things true. If you consistently tell yourself you're inadequate, unprepared, and worthless, you'll act in ways that confirm those beliefs. The most powerful realization is that you have a choice about your internal dialogue. You're not a victim of your thoughts, you're the author of them. You can learn to catch destructive thinking patterns and consciously replace them with more supportive ones. This takes practice, like any skill, but it's perhaps the most important skill you can develop for building unshakable confidence. The most counterintuitive lesson I've learned about confidence is this: the people with the strongest confidence are not those who have never failed, but those who have failed the most and learned to extract value from every setback. I discovered this truth through what I initially considered the most humiliating experience of my professional life. It was 1912, and I had been invited to give a keynote address at the annual convention of the National Association of Sales Managers in Chicago. This was the biggest speaking opportunity of my career. Over 1,000 successful business leaders would be in the audience. I had prepared meticulously, crafted what I thought was a brilliant speech, and arrived feeling supremely confident. The speech was a disaster, not just a minor disappointment, but a complete catastrophe. My timing was off, my jokes fell flat, and my main points seemed to confuse, rather than inspire the audience. Halfway through, I could see people checking their watches and whispering to each other. By the end, the applause was polite but clearly obligatory. I had failed spectacularly in front of the very people I most wanted to impress. I was devastated. For days, I couldn't eat or sleep properly. I replayed every horrible moment, torturing myself with the memory of my inadequacy. I seriously considered giving up speaking entirely and returning to some safe, anonymous career where I would never have to risk such humiliation again. But then something shifted in my thinking. Instead of continuing to treat this failure as evidence of my inadequacy, I decided to treat it as data, valuable information that could help me improve. I forced myself to analyze exactly what had gone wrong and why. I realized that my speech had been perfectly crafted for an audience of public speaking students, not seasoned business executives. I had misjudged their level of sophistication, their interests, and their expectations. My content was too basic, my examples too simple, and my delivery too professorial. The failure wasn't evidence that I couldn't speak. It was evidence that I needed to better understand my audience. I also discovered that my preparation, while thorough in terms of content, had been inadequate in terms of audience research. I had spent weeks perfecting my material, but almost no time understanding the specific needs, challenges, and communication preferences of sales managers. I had prepared the wrong speech for the right audience. This analysis led me to develop what I now call failure forensics, a systematic method for extracting maximum value from every setback. When something goes wrong, instead of wallowing in shame or making excuses, I immediately begin investigating what specific factors contributed to this outcome. What assumptions did I make that proved incorrect? What skills do I need to develop? What would I do differently next time? The remarkable thing about this approach is that it transforms failure from a source of shame into a source of strength. When you view setbacks as learning opportunities rather than personal indictments, they become stepping stones rather than roadblocks. Each failure teaches you something valuable that success never could. I began keeping what I called a failure log, a detailed record of every speaking disaster, business setback, and personal disappointment, along with the lessons I extracted from each experience. This log became one of my most valuable possessions because it contained hard-won wisdom that I could never have gained any other way. The Chicago disaster taught me to research my audience as thoroughly as I researched my topic. A failed business partnership taught me the importance of clear agreements and aligned expectations. A rejected book proposal taught me to understand publishers' needs rather than just writing what I wanted to write. Each failure expanded my understanding and improved my future performance. I noticed that my students who embraced this approach to failure developed confidence much faster than those who tried to avoid setbacks entirely. The ones who tried to play it safe, who never attempted anything that might result in failure, remained weak and timid. But those who were willing to fail, learn, and try again developed genuine strength and resilience. There's a crucial distinction here that many people miss. I'm not advocating reckless behavior or celebrating failure for its own sake. I'm talking about the willingness to take appropriate risks in pursuit of worthwhile goals, coupled with the discipline to learn from whatever outcomes result. Intelligent failure, where you gain valuable insights, is infinitely better than cautious inaction. The confidence that comes from surviving failure is qualitatively different from confidence based on avoiding it. When you've failed repeatedly and learned to bounce back, you develop a deep trust in your own resilience. You know that even if your next venture doesn't succeed, you'll extract value from the experience and emerge stronger. This knowledge is incredibly liberating. When you're not afraid of failure, you can pursue opportunities that others avoid. You can take creative risks, speak uncomfortable truths, and attempt ambitious projects because you know that even if they don't work out as planned, you'll gain something valuable from the experience. I've learned to reframe failure entirely. Instead of seeing it as the opposite of success, I see it as a necessary component of success. Every failure brings you closer to success by eliminating approaches that don't work and revealing approaches that might. Thomas Edison understood this when he said he hadn't failed 10,000 times in developing the light bulb. He had found 10,000 ways that didn't work. Early in my teaching career, I made a mistake that nearly destroyed my confidence and taught me one of the most valuable lessons about authenticity. I had been studying the great orators of the day, William Jennings Bryan, Theodore Roosevelt, and other powerful speakers, and I became convinced that I needed to imitate their style to be successful. I spent months trying to transform myself into a carbon copy of these speakers. I practiced their gestures, adopted their vocal patterns, and even tried to copy their way of thinking about issues. I thought that if I could just master their techniques, I would become as powerful and influential as they were. The result was a disaster. Instead of becoming more confident, I became increasingly uncomfortable with myself. My students began commenting that something seemed off about my presentations. I felt like I was wearing a costume that didn't fit, playing a role that wasn't meant for me. The harder I tried to be like someone else, the more artificial and unconvincing I became. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to be William Jennings Bryan and started trying to be the best possible version of Dale Carnegie. I realized that people weren't drawn to my classes because I reminded them of famous speakers. They came because I offered something uniquely my own, a farm boy's practical wisdom combined with genuine empathy for their struggles. I had been born and raised in rural Missouri, and I spoke with the directness and honesty of someone who had worked with his hands and understood real hardship. I had overcome my own paralyzing shyness, which gave me authentic credibility with students facing similar challenges. I had a natural inclination toward encouragement and practical advice rather than grand rhetoric. These weren't weaknesses to overcome, they were strengths to develop. When I stopped trying to be an imitation of someone else and started being an authentic version of myself, everything changed. My confidence soared because I was no longer fighting against my natural tendencies. My students responded more enthusiastically because they could sense my genuineness. My teaching became more effective because it was based on who I really was rather than who I thought I should be. This is what I call finding your authentic voice, the process of discovering and developing your natural communication style rather than trying to copy someone else's. Your authentic voice includes not just how you speak, but how you think, how you connect with others, and how you express your unique perspective on the world. The first step in developing your authentic voice is to identify your natural communication strengths. Are you naturally funny or naturally serious? Do you connect through stories or through logic? Are you energetic and dynamic or calm and thoughtful? Do you inspire through passion or through careful reasoning? There is no right or wrong answer. There are only different styles that work for different people. I learned to pay attention to when people responded most positively to me. It wasn't when I was trying to be impressive or sophisticated. It was when I was being most like myself, when I shared simple, practical stories from my own experience, when I spoke with the unpretentious directness of my rural background, when I focused on helping people overcome their fears rather than demonstrating my expertise. The second step is to stop trying to hide or overcome your natural personality traits and start leveraging them as strengths. I used to be embarrassed by my rural background and my lack of formal education. I thought I needed to sound more sophisticated to be taken seriously, but I discovered that my plain-spoken, down-to-earth approach was actually one of my greatest assets. People trusted me precisely because I didn't put on airs. Your quirks, your background, your natural way of seeing the world, these aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the source of your unique value. The market doesn't need another copy of someone who already exists. It needs the first and only version of you. I started encouraging my students to stop trying to be professional speakers and start being themselves in a professional context. The transformation was remarkable. The accountant who thought he was too boring discovered that his methodical, detailed approach was exactly what audiences needed for complex financial topics. The artist who thought she was too emotional learned that her passion and creativity brought dry subjects to life. The third step is to have the courage to be disliked by some people in order to be truly valued by others. When you're trying to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. When you develop your authentic voice, some people won't resonate with your style, and that's perfectly fine. The people who do connect with your authentic self will be much more loyal and enthusiastic than those who only mildly appreciate your imitation of someone else. I learned that confidence comes not from being universally liked, but from being genuinely valued by the right people. When you're operating from your authentic voice, the right opportunities and relationships naturally gravitate toward you. You attract people who appreciate what you uniquely offer rather than those who are looking for something you're not. The paradox is that becoming more yourself makes you more appealing to others, not less. Authenticity is magnetic because it's so rare. In a world full of people trying to be someone else, the person who is comfortable being themselves stands out dramatically. The most surprising discovery in my years of teaching was that the speakers who tried to appear perfect were the least trusted, while those who appropriately shared their struggles and imperfections created the deepest connections with their audiences. I learned this lesson through a student who taught me that vulnerability, when used strategically, is one of the most powerful confidence tools available. Her name was Catherine, a successful doctor who had joined my class because she needed to present her research at medical conferences. Catherine was brilliant, accomplished, and meticulously prepared, but her presentations were falling flat. Audiences respected her expertise, but didn't connect with her personally. They admired her knowledge, but weren't inspired by her message. The problem was that Catherine presented herself as flawless. She never admitted uncertainty, never acknowledged mistakes, and never shared any personal struggles. While this might seem like confidence, it actually created distance between her and her audience. People couldn't relate to someone who appeared to have never faced challenges or made errors. During one of our practice sessions, I suggested that Catherine share the story of a patient case that had initially puzzled her, a time when she hadn't immediately known the diagnosis and had to work through the problem systematically. She was horrified. "I can't tell people about my mistakes," she protested. "They'll lose confidence in my abilities." I explained what I had learned about the paradox of vulnerability. When you appropriately share your struggles and growth, people trust you more, not less. They see you as human rather than as a distant expert. They connect with your journey rather than just your destination. Most importantly, they believe that if you could overcome challenges and learn from mistakes, they can too. Reluctantly, Catherine tried incorporating one brief story about a diagnostic challenge she had faced early in her residency. The response was immediate and powerful. For the first time, her audience leaned forward during her presentation. They asked thoughtful questions. Several doctors approached her afterward to share their own similar experiences and to thank her for her honesty. This taught me the principle of strategic vulnerability, the art of selectively sharing struggles, failures, and growth moments in ways that create connection without undermining credibility. The key word is strategic. This isn't about oversharing or making yourself the center of attention. It's about thoughtfully revealing aspects of your human experience that help others relate to you and learn from your journey. I began experimenting with this principle in my own speaking. Instead of trying to present myself as someone who had never struggled with confidence, I started sharing carefully chosen stories about my own journey from paralyzing shyness to comfortable public speaking. I talked about specific moments of fear, particular failures, and the gradual process of growth. The impact was transformational. Audiences who had seen me as a distant expert began viewing me as a guide who had walked the path they were trying to navigate. They trusted my advice more because they understood that it came from personal experience rather than theoretical knowledge. They felt hopeful about their own potential because they could see that I had started from a place similar to where they were. There are important guidelines for practicing strategic vulnerability effectively. First, share struggles that you've overcome or are actively working through, not current crises that you haven't processed. The goal is to inspire hope and learning, not to seek sympathy or support for current difficulties. Second, focus on challenges that are relevant to your audience's experience. If you're speaking about professional development, share professional struggles. If you're teaching about relationships, share relationship lessons. The vulnerability should serve your message rather than distracting from it. Third, always include the lessons learned or growth achieved. Don't just share the struggle. Share what it taught you and how it made you stronger or wiser. This transforms the story from mere confession into valuable insight that others can apply to their own lives. I learned to use what I call bridge stories, brief anecdotes that create connection points between my experience and my audience's challenges. These stories typically follow a simple structure. Here's a situation I faced, here's what went wrong or what I learned, and here's how that insight applies to what you're dealing with. The strategic use of vulnerability also makes your successes more meaningful and believable. When people understand the struggles you've overcome to achieve something, they appreciate the achievement more deeply. They also believe more strongly that similar success is possible for them because they can see the human path that led to your accomplishments. Perhaps most importantly, strategic vulnerability gives others permission to be imperfect while striving for growth. When you model the truth that confident people aren't those who never struggle, but those who struggle and keep moving forward, you create space for others to embrace their own imperfections while working toward their goals. One of the most overlooked aspects of confidence is how profoundly your physical presence affects both how others perceive you and how you perceive yourself. I discovered this connection through a student whose transformation taught me that confidence isn't just a mental state. It's a physical practice that shapes your entire being. James was a talented engineer who possessed deep expertise but couldn't command respect in meetings. Despite his knowledge, colleagues frequently interrupted him, dismissed his ideas, and treated him as if his contributions were unimportant. He came to my class convinced that his problem was his speaking content, but within minutes of watching him present, I identified the real issue. His physical presence was communicating insecurity before he ever opened his mouth. James slouched. When he stood, avoided eye contact with his audience, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. His gestures were small and hesitant, kept close to his body, as if he were trying to take up as little space as possible. Every aspect of his physical presentation signaled uncertainty and apologized for his presence. rather than claiming his right to be heard. I had him perform a simple experiment. First, he delivered a brief presentation using his natural posture and movements. Then, I had him deliver the same content while standing tall, making deliberate eye contact, and speaking with full voice. The difference was remarkable, not just in how he appeared to others, but in how he felt about himself. I actually felt more confident just by changing my posture, he told me afterward. This taught me a fundamental principle. Your body doesn't just reflect your confidence, it creates it. When you carry yourself like a confident person, you begin to feel more confident. When you use your voice with authority, you start to believe in your own authority. Your physical presence shapes your mental state just as much as your mental state shapes your physical presence. I began studying the physical habits of naturally confident people and noticed consistent patterns. They stood with their shoulders back and their spine straight, not rigid, but naturally upright. They made steady eye contact without staring aggressively. They used gestures that extended beyond their personal space, claiming the room with their movements. They spoke with full voice, neither shouting nor whispering, but projecting their words with clear intention. Most importantly, they moved through space as if they belonged there. They didn't rush or skulk or try to make themselves invisible. They walked with purpose, sat with presence, and occupied their fair share of physical space without apology. Their bodies communicated that they had a right to be wherever they were and to contribute whatever they were offering. I developed what I call the presence protocol, a systematic approach to building physical confidence. It begins with posture, the foundation of all physical presence. I teach people to imagine a string attached to the top of their head, gently pulling them upward. This naturally aligns the spine, lifts the chest, and creates an impression of alertness and engagement. Breathing is equally crucial. Confident people breathe deeply and steadily, which not only projects calm authority, but actually creates it. When you breathe shallowly from your chest, you trigger your body's stress response. When you breathe deeply from your diaphragm, you activate your body's relaxation response and think more clearly. I taught James a simple breathing technique. Before any important interaction, take 3 deep breaths that expand your abdomen rather than your chest. This immediately calms your nervous system and gives you access to your full voice and clear thinking. The physical act of deep breathing signals to your brain that you're safe and in control. Eye contact deserves special attention because it's one of the most powerful tools for building connection and projecting confidence. The key is to make eye contact that feels natural rather than aggressive. I teach a technique of looking at one person for a complete thought, then smoothly transitioning to another person for the next thought. This creates the impression that you're having individual conversations with each person in the room. Voice is perhaps the most immediately noticeable aspect of physical presence. Confident people speak with what I call grounded authority. Their voice comes from deep in their chest rather than high in their throat. They speak slowly enough to be easily understood, but quickly enough to maintain energy. They use pauses strategically rather than filling every silence with or Gestures should be natural extensions of your thoughts and emotions. Confident people don't keep their hands glued to their sides or hidden in their pockets. They use their hands to illustrate their points, to emphasize important ideas, and to create visual interest. The key is to make gestures that feel authentic to you rather than copying someone else's style. The remarkable thing about working on physical presence is how quickly it affects your mental state. Within days of practicing these techniques, James was reporting that he felt more confident in all areas of his life, not just in presentations. His colleagues began treating him with more respect, asking for his opinions more frequently, and implementing his suggestions more readily. The final principle of unshakable confidence may be the most important and the most misunderstood: the power of genuine interest in other people. I discovered this truth through observing the most naturally confident person I ever met, a janitor named Frank, who worked in the building where I taught my first classes in New York City. Frank possessed no formal education, held what others might consider a humble job, and had never read a book on confidence or public speaking. Yet everyone who met him, from students to executives to professors, was drawn to him like a magnet. He commanded respect, inspired affection, and seemed to effortlessly connect with people from every walk of life. I was fascinated by Frank's natural confidence and began studying his interactions with others. What I discovered revolutionized my understanding of how confidence really works. Frank never talked about himself unless directly asked. Instead, he seemed genuinely fascinated by every person he met. He asked thoughtful questions about their work, their interests, their challenges, and their dreams. When a student mentioned struggling with a difficult course, Frank would remember weeks later and ask how it was going. When an executive shared concern about a business decision, Frank would follow up with sincere interest in the outcome. When a professor mentioned a hobby or interest, Frank would seek to understand what made it meaningful to them. The remarkable thing was that people left conversations with Frank feeling better about themselves. They felt heard, understood, and valued. They came away thinking Frank was one of the most interesting people they'd ever met, even though he had shared very little about himself. His confidence wasn't built on making impressive statements about his own accomplishments. It was built on making others feel important and appreciated. I realized that Frank had stumbled upon a profound truth that most people miss entirely. The most confident people are those who are least focused on themselves. Instead of worrying about whether others will find them interesting, impressive, or likable, they focus entirely on finding others interesting, impressive, and likable. This shift in focus eliminates self-consciousness while building genuine connections. I began experimenting with this approach in my own interactions. Instead of entering social or professional situations wondering what others would think of me, I started entering them curious about what I could learn about others. Instead of planning what I would say to impress people, I planned what I would ask to understand them better. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. When you're genuinely interested in other people, several powerful things happen simultaneously. First, you stop being nervous about yourself because your attention is directed outward rather than inward. Second, people respond positively to your sincere curiosity because everyone wants to feel understood and appreciated. Third, you actually become more interesting because interested people are inherently attractive. But here's the crucial distinction. This must be genuine interest, not a manipulative technique. People can immediately sense the difference between someone who is truly curious about them and someone who is pretending to care in order to gain some advantage. Authentic interest creates connection. Strategic interest creates suspicion and resentment. I developed what I call the curiosity method for building genuine interest in others. It begins with adopting what I call the fascination mindset, the belief that every person you meet has something interesting, valuable, or unique about their experience that you can learn from. This isn't just a nice idea, it's absolutely true. Every person has faced challenges, developed insights, and accumulated knowledge that could benefit you if you're curious enough to discover it. The second element is asking better questions. Instead of the typical, "What do you do?" which often leads to superficial job descriptions, try questions like, "What's the most interesting project you're working on?" Or, "What drew you to that field originally?" These questions invite people to share their passions and interests rather than just their titles. I learned to listen not just for information, but for emotion. When someone mentions something they care deeply about, their voice changes, their energy shifts, and their entire demeanor becomes more animated. These are the moments to lean in, ask follow-up questions, and explore what makes that topic meaningful to them. The third element is remembering and following up. Nothing makes people feel more valued than when you remember something important they shared with you weeks or months earlier. I started keeping brief notes about meaningful conversations, not to manipulate people, but to honor what they had shared with me, and to continue building authentic relationships. This approach creates what I call confidence through contribution. When you consistently make others feel heard, understood, and appreciated, you develop a deep sense of your own value. You know that your presence in any situation makes that situation better for other people. This knowledge creates unshakable confidence because it's based on the genuine value you provide to others. The paradox is perfect. The less you focus on being confident, the more confident you become. The less you worry about making a good impression, the better impression you make. The less you try to prove your worth, the more valuable others perceive you to be. When you shift from trying to get appreciation to giving appreciation, everything changes in your favor. All the principles in the world mean nothing if you can't apply them when everything is on the line. I learned this truth when I faced the highest pressure speaking engagement of my career, an invitation to address the International Chamber of Commerce Annual Convention in 1920. 5,000 business leaders from around the world would be in attendance, including many of the most influential entrepreneurs and executives of the era. This wasn't just another speaking opportunity. It was a chance to establish myself as a serious authority on human relations and business communication. Success could transform my career and give my ideas a global platform. Failure would likely end my aspirations to influence leaders at the highest levels. The stakes couldn't have been higher. In the weeks leading up to the event, I found myself applying every principle I had learned about confidence building, but with an intensity I had never experienced before. The pressure was so great that it threatened to overwhelm even my most practiced techniques. I realized I needed a systematic approach for maintaining confidence under extreme pressure. I developed what I call the Pressure Performance Protocol, a step-by-step system for applying confidence principles when the stakes are highest and the margin for error is smallest. This protocol has since helped thousands of my students navigate their own high-pressure situations, from crucial job interviews to make-or-break presentations to life-changing negotiations. The first element of the protocol is intensive preparation. That goes beyond normal readiness. For high-stakes situations, I prepare not just for what I expect to happen, but for everything that could possibly go wrong. I rehearse my material until I could deliver it in my sleep. I anticipate every conceivable question and prepare thoughtful responses. I visualize technical problems, hostile audiences, and unexpected interruptions, then plan how I would handle each scenario. For the Chamber of Commerce speech, I prepared 3 different versions of my presentation, one for an enthusiastic audience, one for a skeptical audience, and one for a distracted audience. I practiced recovering from memory lapses, dealing with microphone failures, and responding to aggressive questions. By the time of the actual event, there was virtually nothing that could surprise me. The second element is what I call confidence anchoring, creating physical and mental rituals that immediately access your strongest confident state. I developed a specific routine that I follow before every high-pressure situation, a series of breathing exercises, physical movements, and mental affirmations that calm my nervous system and activate my most resourceful thinking before walking. Onto that stage in 1920, I found a quiet corner backstage and went through my anchoring sequence. I took 10 deep breaths, rolled my shoulders back, and reminded myself of my core purpose, to serve this audience by sharing insights that could genuinely help them in their businesses and relationships. This ritual transformed my nervous energy into focused excitement. The third element is perspective management, maintaining the right mental framework about what's actually at stake. High-pressure situations often feel more important than they actually are. I learned to ask myself, in 5 years, will this moment matter as much as it feels like it matters right now? Usually the answer is no. This doesn't minimize the importance of performing well, but it prevents anxiety from paralyzing your performance. During the chamber speech, when I felt my nerves rising, I reminded myself that this was an opportunity to help people, not a test of my worth as a human being. Whether this particular speech succeeded or failed would not determine the value of my ideas or my future potential. This perspective allowed me to take appropriate care with my performance without being crushed by the pressure. The fourth element is what I call real-time confidence recovery. Techniques for regaining your composure when things go wrong during a high-stakes situation, because no matter how well you prepare, unexpected challenges will arise. Microphones will fail, key decision-makers will arrive late, difficult questions will catch you off guard. During my chamber speech, exactly such a situation occurred. Halfway through my presentation, a section of the audience began talking among themselves, clearly distracted by some business matter. In that moment, I had a choice. I could panic about losing their attention, or I could apply my confidence principles in real time. I chose to use the service mindset principle. Instead of worrying about how their distraction reflected on me, I focused on how I could better serve the portion of the audience that was still engaged. I adjusted my delivery to be more dynamic, incorporated a relevant story I hadn't planned to tell, and used humor to recapture attention. The strategy worked, and the speech concluded with enthusiastic applause. The fifth element is post-performance analysis that builds confidence for future high-stakes situations. Regardless of how well or poorly things go, I immediately conduct a thorough review. What worked well? What could be improved? What unexpected challenges arose? What would I do differently next time? This analysis transforms every high-pressure experience into preparation for the next one. The chamber speech was ultimately a tremendous success, leading to speaking invitations around the world and establishing my reputation in international business circles. But more importantly, it proved to me that the confidence principles I had developed could withstand the ultimate test of real-world pressure. When you have a systematic approach to high-stakes situations, you can perform at your best even when everything is on the line. The greatest challenge in building confidence isn't learning the principles, it's maintaining them over years and decades. I learned this lesson through watching hundreds of my students over time. Some would experience dramatic breakthroughs in my classes, only to gradually slip back into old patterns of fear and self-doubt. Others would build steadily increasing confidence that continued growing long after our formal training ended. The difference wasn't talent, circumstances, or even initial results. The difference was whether they understood confidence as a temporary achievement or as a lifelong practice. Those who treated confidence like a skill to be maintained and developed continued growing stronger. Those who treated it like a problem to be solved once and forgotten gradually lost what they had gained. I discovered this truth in my own life. During what I call my confidence crisis of 1925, I had achieved considerable success. My courses were popular, my reputation was growing, and I was earning more money than I had ever imagined possible. Yet I found myself becoming complacent about the very practices that had created my success. I stopped preparing as thoroughly, stopped challenging myself with new speaking opportunities, and stopped actively working on my own development. The result was predictable. My confidence began to erode. I started doubting my abilities, avoiding difficult speaking engagements, and feeling like an imposter despite my track record of success. I realized that confidence isn't a destination you reach. It's a muscle that requires regular exercise to maintain its strength. This crisis forced me to develop what I now call the momentum maintenance system, a set of daily, weekly, and monthly practices that ensure your confidence continues growing rather than stagnating or declining. This system has kept my confidence strong through decades of challenges, setbacks, and changing circumstances. The foundation of the system is daily confidence practices. Just as you must exercise your body regularly to maintain physical fitness, you must exercise your confidence regularly To maintain psychological strength, I established a morning routine that includes reviewing my goals, practicing gratitude for my abilities and opportunities, and setting specific confidence challenges for the day ahead. These challenges don't have to be dramatic. They can be as simple as starting a conversation with someone new, volunteering to answer a question in a meeting, or taking on a task that stretches your current abilities slightly. The key is to do something every day that requires you to act with confidence, rather than waiting for confidence to arrive before you act. I also developed a weekly review process where I examine my confidence challenges from the previous week. What situations did I handle well? Where did I retreat into comfort zones? What opportunities did I miss because of fear? What evidence did I gather about my capabilities? This weekly analysis helps me course correct before small confidence lapses become major setbacks. The monthly element involves setting new confidence goals that push me beyond my current comfort zone. Every month, I commit to attempting something that scares me slightly, whether it's speaking to a new type of audience, learning a skill that challenges me, or having a difficult conversation I've been avoiding. These monthly challenges ensure that I'm always growing rather than maintaining. But perhaps the most important aspect of long-term confidence building is understanding that setbacks are not failures. They're feedback. In 1929, when the stock market crashed and many of my corporate clients canceled their training programs, I faced a crisis that could have destroyed my confidence entirely. Instead, I chose to see it as an opportunity to develop resilience and creativity. I learned to reframe every setback as a confidence-building opportunity. Lost a major client? This is a chance to develop new business skills and discover new markets. Made a mistake during an important presentation? This is an opportunity to practice recovery techniques and demonstrate grace under pressure. Faced criticism from colleagues? This is a chance to strengthen my ability to receive feedback without being devastated by it. The compound effect of these practices over time is remarkable. Small daily actions accumulate into significant monthly progress. Monthly challenges accumulate into yearly transformations. Yearly growth accumulates into decade-spanning expertise and unshakable confidence. The key is consistency rather than intensity. Better to practice confidence building every day for 10 minutes than to practice intensively once a week for an hour. I've also learned the importance of what I call confidence diversification. Just as financial advisors recommend diversifying investments across different assets, I recommend building confidence across different areas of life. Don't put all your confidence eggs in one basket, whether that's professional success, physical appearance, or social approval. Build confidence through multiple sources: your character, your skills, your relationships, your contributions, and your growth. This diversification protects you when one area of life faces challenges. If your professional confidence takes a hit due to job loss or career setbacks, you still have confidence from your personal relationships, your integrity, and your ability to learn and grow. If your physical confidence suffers due to aging or health issues, you still have confidence from your wisdom, your experience, and your capacity to contribute value to others. The ultimate goal is to build what I call anti-fragile confidence. Confidence that actually grows stronger through challenges rather than being weakened by them. This kind of confidence comes from years of proving to yourself that you can handle whatever life presents, learn from every experience, and emerge stronger from every setback. One of the most profound discoveries of my career came through an unexpected source. My students taught me that teaching others builds your own confidence more powerfully than almost any other activity. I learned this lesson when I first started training instructors to teach my courses in other cities across America. In 1923, I was approached by a businessman named William, who wanted to bring my public speaking training to his company in Chicago. He had attended one of my New York courses and experienced a dramatic transformation in his own confidence. Instead of simply hiring me to travel to Chicago, He asked if I would train him to teach the principles himself so he could offer ongoing support to his employees. I was initially hesitant. How could William, who had been terrified of public speaking just months earlier, possibly teach others to overcome the same fears? But his enthusiasm was compelling, and I agreed to experiment with training him as an instructor. What happened next revolutionized my understanding of how confidence develops and spreads. As William prepared to teach his first class, something remarkable occurred. His own confidence grew exponentially. The process of organizing the material, anticipating student questions, and preparing to guide others through their fear forced him to deepen his understanding of every principle. He couldn't simply apply the techniques. He had to truly master them in order to help others succeed. When William taught his first class, he was nervous but surprisingly effective. His students responded to his authenticity and his genuine desire to help them overcome struggles he had recently faced himself. But the most significant change was in William himself. After teaching for just a few weeks, his confidence had reached levels that surprised even me. He was volunteering for leadership roles at work, pursuing new business opportunities, and speaking with an authority he had never possessed before. This taught me a fundamental truth. When you teach others what you've learned, you don't just help them. You accelerate your own growth and deepen your own confidence. Teaching forces you to articulate principles clearly, answer challenging questions, and model the behaviors you're advocating. It transforms you from someone who has learned something into someone who truly understands it. I began encouraging all my advanced students to find opportunities to share their knowledge with others. This didn't mean they had to become professional teachers or speakers. It meant finding ways to mentor colleagues, guide family members, or volunteer to help others develop skills they had already mastered. The results were consistently powerful, both for the teachers and for those they helped. There's something magical that happens when you shift from being someone who needs help to someone who provides help. Your entire self-concept evolves. Instead of seeing yourself as someone struggling with confidence issues, you begin seeing yourself as someone who helps others overcome confidence issues. This identity shift creates unshakable confidence because it's based on your value to others rather than your need for validation from others. I developed what I call the mentorship confidence cycle. When you teach others, you reinforce your own learning through repetition and explanation. When you answer their questions, you deepen your own understanding by considering new perspectives. When you guide them through challenges, you strengthen your own ability to handle similar difficulties. When you witness their growth, you gain evidence of the power and validity of the principles you've learned. But teaching others also builds confidence in a deeper way. It connects you to a purpose larger than yourself. When your confidence is based solely on personal achievement, it can feel fragile and temporary. When your confidence is based on your ability to help others achieve their goals, it becomes robust and enduring. You know that your knowledge and experience have genuine value because you see the positive impact they have on other people's lives. I started training instructors systematically, not just because I wanted to expand my business, but because I recognized that teaching was one of the most powerful confidence-building activities I could offer my students. Many of my most successful graduates were those who had gone on to teach others what they had learned from me. The teaching doesn't have to be formal or professional. One of my students, an accountant named Sarah, began informally mentoring new employees at her firm, helping them develop presentation skills and professional confidence. Another student, a salesman named Robert, started volunteering to coach youth sports, applying the confidence principles to help young athletes overcome performance anxiety. In each case, the act of teaching reinforced their own confidence while multiplying the impact of what they had learned. They discovered that confidence isn't a finite resource that diminishes when shared. It's actually strengthened and multiplied through the act of giving it away to others. This principle extends beyond formal teaching situations. every time you encourage someone who is struggling, share a lesson you've learned, or model confident behavior for others to observe. You're teaching. Every time you refuse to join in when others are tearing someone down, stand up for what you believe in, or demonstrate grace under pressure, you're teaching through your example. The most confident people I've known are those who see themselves as having a responsibility to lift others up. They understand that their own strength is not diminished by helping others become strong. It's actually increased. They recognize that confidence, like love, grows when it's shared rather than when it's hoarded. The ultimate test of confidence isn't how you perform when everything is going according to plan. It's how you maintain your composure and effectiveness when the world seems to be falling apart around you. I learned this lesson during the Great Depression, when everything I thought I knew about business, success, and security was challenged by forces completely beyond my control. By 1929, I had built what seemed like a solid, successful enterprise. My courses were thriving, my reputation was established, and my financial future appeared secure. Then came October 24th, Black Thursday, and the stock market crash that would plunge America into the deepest economic crisis in its history. Within months, many of my corporate clients had canceled their training programs. Enrollment in my public courses dropped dramatically as people struggled simply to survive. I watched successful business leaders, men and women who had seemed supremely confident just months earlier, become paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Some lost not just their businesses, but their sense of identity and self-worth. Others, however, seemed to find new strength in the adversity, adapting their approaches and discovering opportunities that others couldn't see. This crisis taught me the difference between fragile confidence and anti-fragile confidence. Fragile confidence depends on favorable external circumstances and collapses when those circumstances change. Anti-fragile confidence actually grows stronger through challenges, setbacks, and uncertainty. The people who thrived during the Depression possessed this anti-fragile quality. They had built their confidence on foundations that couldn't be shaken by external events. I realized I had to choose. I could allow the economic crisis to destroy my confidence and retreat into safety, or I could use it as an opportunity to develop the kind of unshakable confidence that could withstand any storm. I chose to see the Depression not as a catastrophe, but as a laboratory for testing and strengthening my understanding of human resilience. During those difficult years, I developed what I call the adaptability principles, ways of maintaining confidence when the rules of the game change completely. The first principle is accepting uncertainty as the natural state of life rather than as an aberration to be feared. Most people build their confidence on the illusion that they can predict and control future events. When that illusion is shattered, their confidence crumbles. True confidence comes from knowing that you can handle uncertainty, not from believing that uncertainty won't occur. I learned to find excitement rather than terror in not knowing exactly what the future would hold. This shift in perspective transformed uncertainty from a source of anxiety into a source of possibility. The second principle is focusing on what you can control rather than lamenting what you cannot. During the Depression, I couldn't control the economy, the stock market, or my clients' financial decisions, but I could control my response to these events. I could control how hard I worked, how creatively I approached problems, and how I chose to interpret setbacks. I redirected my energy from worrying about external circumstances to improving my internal capabilities. I used the forced slowdown in business to develop new course materials, refine my teaching methods, and deepen my understanding of human psychology. I chose to see the crisis as an opportunity for professional development rather than as evidence of professional failure. The third principle is maintaining faith in your core value while being flexible about how you deliver that value. The economic crisis didn't change the fact that people needed to develop confidence and communication skills. If anything, these needs became more urgent as competition for jobs and opportunities intensified. But the way people wanted to access these skills had to change. I adapted by offering shorter, more affordable courses, developing correspondence materials for people who couldn't attend in person, and creating specialized programs for unemployed workers who needed to rebuild their confidence along with their careers. I maintained my commitment to helping people develop confidence while completely transforming how I delivered that help. The fourth principle is viewing crisis as information rather than as judgment. When your carefully laid plans fall apart, it's tempting to interpret this as evidence that you're incompetent, unlucky, or doomed to failure. In reality, crisis often provides valuable feedback about assumptions that needed to be questioned, strategies that needed to be updated, and skills that needed to be developed. The Depression taught me that my previous success had made me somewhat complacent. I had been coasting on established systems rather than continuously innovating and improving. The crisis forced me to rediscover the creativity and resourcefulness that had built my business in the first place. It reminded me that confidence must be earned anew in each generation of challenges. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that confidence in uncertain times comes from building your identity around your character and capabilities rather than your circumstances and achievements. External success can be taken away by forces beyond your control, but your integrity, your wisdom, your relationships, and your ability to learn and grow belong to you permanently. The people who maintained their confidence during the Depression were those who knew that their worth wasn't determined by their wealth, their status wasn't defined by their job title, and their future wasn't limited by their current circumstances. They had built their confidence on foundations that no economic or crisis could shake. As I reflect on a lifetime dedicated to helping people overcome their fears and build unshakable confidence, I'm struck by a profound truth. The confidence you build doesn't end with you. It ripples outward through every person you touch, every relationship you nurture, and every example you set. Your confidence becomes a gift that keeps giving long after you're gone. I learned this lesson through watching my students over the decades. A shy accountant who learned to speak with authority went on to mentor dozens of young professionals. A terrified teacher who overcame her fear of public speaking inspired thousands of students to pursue their dreams. A business executive who developed genuine confidence led his company through a crisis that saved hundreds of jobs. Their confidence didn't just transform their own lives, it became a force for positive change in their communities and organizations. This is what I call your confidence legacy, the ongoing impact of your personal transformation on the world around you. When you develop unshakable confidence, you don't just improve your own life, you become a source of strength for your family, an inspiration to your colleagues, and a model of what's possible for everyone who observes your journey. Your children watch how you handle challenges and learn what confidence looks like in action. Your spouse experiences the security that comes from being with someone who knows their own worth. Your friends are inspired by your willingness to take appropriate risks and pursue meaningful goals. Your colleagues benefit from your ability to speak up when something important needs to be said. But the legacy goes deeper than inspiration. Confident people create confident environments. When you stop being driven by fear and insecurity, you stop participating in the toxic dynamics that poison so many workplaces and relationships. You don't engage in gossip because you're not trying to build yourself up by tearing others down. You don't hoard opportunities because you trust in your ability to create new ones. You don't attack others when you're criticized because your worth isn't dependent on being right about everything. Instead, you become the kind of person who lifts others up. You celebrate colleagues' successes because you're not threatened by them. You share credit generously because you don't need to hoard recognition. You take responsibility for mistakes because you're not afraid of being seen as imperfect. You offer encouragement to those who are struggling because you remember what it felt like to be in their position. I've watched this transformation occur thousands of times, and it never fails to move me. People who begin my courses consumed with their own fears and limitations gradually become sources of strength and encouragement for others. They discover that confidence isn't a zero-sum game. Making others feel confident doesn't diminish your own confidence. In fact, it multiplies it as you apply the principles I've shared with you. Remember that you're not just working on yourself. You're preparing to become the kind of person others can depend on, learn from, and be inspired by. You're developing the strength to be truly helpful to other people, not because you need their approval, but because you have something valuable to offer. The world desperately needs confident people, not arrogant people who think they have all the answers, but genuinely confident people who know they can handle whatever questions arise. We need people who can speak truth with kindness, take action despite uncertainty, and maintain their principles under pressure. We need people who can admit their mistakes without being destroyed by them, celebrate others' successes without being diminished by them, and face setbacks without abandoning their goals. Your confidence journey begins with you, but it doesn't end with you. Every time you act with courage despite fear, you give someone else permission to do the same. Every time you stand up for what you believe in, you show others that it's possible to have convictions without being cruel. Every time you bounce back from failure, you prove that setbacks don't have to be permanent. This is your opportunity to join the ranks of people who make the world better simply by being confidently, authentically themselves. You have everything you need to build the unshakable confidence that will transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. The principles I've shared with you aren't theory. They're a tested path to genuine transformation. Know yourself completely. Prepare like your life depends on it. Start where you are. Focus on service, not self. Master your inner voice. Embrace failure as fuel. Develop your unique voice. Practice strategic vulnerability. Master your physical presence. Cultivate genuine interest in others. These aren't just confidence techniques. They're character principles that will serve you for the rest of your life. Apply them consistently, and you'll discover what I learned on that Missouri pig farm so many years ago. The shy, uncertain person you are today is not the confident, capable person you're destined to become. Your transformation starts now. Your legacy begins with your next confident action. The world is waiting for the gift of your authentic, unshakable confidence.